In the Bible, the story of Exodus is a freedom story. When Israel were enslaved in Egypt, God stepped in, broke the power of Pharaoh, and led them out through the Red Sea and into the Promised Land. And this story is our story too. It connects with our deep human quest for freedom. I'm in Cardiff, and behind me is the Principality Stadium, formerly known as the Millennium Stadium. Thousands of Welsh rugby fans gather here to watch their national team play, and they sing a song. It's a hymn, actually. Bread of Heaven, you may have heard of it. Bread of Heaven is all inspired by the Exodus story. It still speaks to our world today. I came with my two sons to a match here. I tell you, singing that freedom song with 80,000 fans is a very moving experience. Because we're all still on a quest for freedom. There's still so much injustice and oppression in our world. And God is the God of freedom. He's the God of Exodus. He wants to raise up Moses and William Wilberforce and Martin Luther King and you and me to bring liberation and freedom to our world, to break the bonds of injustice and oppression. And for us to be part of that freedom story, we need to know freedom for ourselves. We need to understand what true freedom really is. Well, in the story, Moses is sent into Egypt in order to bring Israel out. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ is, if you like, the new Moses. God sent Jesus into the world to bring Exodus for our entire human story. Jesus is the key to our freedom story. He's the one who shed his own blood, like that Passover lamb on the cross. He shed his blood to break the power of sin and darkness. And he's the one who has come to bring us new life, just as Israel found new freedom. Well, for them, that meant that God had to part the Red Sea. You may know this epic story. It still makes Hollywood films today. God brought Israel out because they were trapped between Pharaoh on the one hand, the Red Sea on the other, and God made a way where there seemed to be no way. Can you imagine what it would have felt like for those former slaves suddenly to experience liberation, walking down that corridor of water and out the other side into a wide open space? This is salvation in the Bible. This is what it means to really follow God. It's to be brought out of darkness and into a new way of living. I remember for myself, when I put my trust in Jesus Christ, I experienced this. I felt like I'd left one life and I had come through to another. I remember singing. I can't sing, but I remember, like Miriam and Moses did after their exodus, I remember singing for joy at what Jesus brought, a true inner freedom from, well, the darkness. We all have our Egypt, right? We all have our inner darkness. We may not be physically enslaved, but we can feel trapped in addictions, in anxieties, in bitterness, in fears, and in circumstances we wouldn't choose. Jesus Christ is true Exodus deliverance. Well, after Israel was set free, what next? Maybe you think that's it. Well, that's not the end of the story. So often in our Western individual culture, we think that freedom is just having no one tell me what to do. Be my own boss and become myself. You know, that doesn't actually work. The truth is, real freedom is not just being brought out of Egypt, it's coming into the Promised Land. It's not just freedom from, it's freedom for a relationship with God, to live the life we were made to live. Well, in the story, God takes Israel then on the other side of the Red Sea. He takes them to Mount Sinai. And there he gives them the 10 Commandments, the law. And these laws are not designed to restrict Israel. They're designed to help these ex-slaves heal their brokenness and learn how to flourish. That's what God's commandments are for. St. Augustine famously said that God's commandments are not walls to hem us in and restrict us. They're like scaffolding to hold us up and to heal us. Imagine a game of rugby here at the Millennium Stadium and there were no rules and there's no referee. It would be chaos, right? And people would get hurt. Life without God's instruction is chaos and people get hurt. We're brought into a covenant relationship with God, and in that we can flourish. God spoke to Israel on Mount Sinai and he said to them in tender words, "You are my treasured possession." The Hebrew word underneath that phrase, treasured possession, is segula. It's a beautiful, tender word that speaks of God saying, I'm going to take care of you now. You're not on your own. As they traveled through the wilderness, he provided for them and protected them. And that's the promise. That's true freedom. When we know we're God's people, when we know we're his segula, through faith in Jesus Christ, whatever wilderness we pass through, whatever challenges life throws at us, we know he will provide for us and he will protect us. That's Exodus. That's the answer to our human quest for freedom. When I was about 5 years of age, I was at a train station with my parents, and I decided I'd had enough of my father's restrictions. I shook off his hand and I ran towards the train. I decided it was time to board. Unfortunately, I didn't realise there was a gap between the train and the platform, and I fell down in that gap. I ended up in a pretty dark place for a 5-year-old to be, down underneath the train. It was scary. It was frightening, and then I remember looking up and seeing two big hands reach down into the darkness. My father, the very one I'd shaken off. And he reached out his hands and said, "Lift up your hands and I'll save you." And so, sure enough, I lifted up my hands and he pulled me out of the darkness from under the train and back onto the platform. Well, I got two things out of that experience. A free poster from the train station, I've still got it. But more importantly, I got a lesson about what true Exodus means. So often we're confused. We think that freedom is shaking off God's control, getting away from God and going our own way. But you know, we often just fall into dark places, scary places. True freedom is God, through Jesus Christ, the real Moses, reaching his hands down into our darkness and saying, if you will take hold of my hands by faith, I can lift you out and I can set you free. You can be my segula and I will take care of you. That's Exodus. And that's the answer to our human quest for freedom. Or as Jesus Christ himself said in John chapter 8, "For if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed."